So in this video, we are going to be introducing blended traditional modalities for those of you that have adopted that modality this fall. And we're going to talk a little bit about how it's actually, as it turns out, not that traditional and somewhat distinct from the basic model of blended courses in that it involves rotating cohorts. And we think this will be helpful for those of you teaching the blended traditional modality, but also those of you that are teaching blended with an online pathway as well. So typically when we teach a course, we are assigned a number of students. In this case, there are 24 students in this class. Let's say it's a 3-credit-hour class. We are assigned a classroom for 3 hours a week in a 3-credit-hour class. If it's a 2-day-a-week class, each of those class periods is 1.5 hours, and all students can fit in the classroom along with the instructor. And so the students will show up in class for 3 hours a week and get all of their engagement with the instructor that is necessary for a 3-credit-hour class in person. Pretty simple. Now, if we were going to adopt a basic blended model, where all faculty engaged in a basic blended course, and let's say they only met with their students in person once a week, it would look something like this. I would meet with all of my students in my classroom on Monday, and then on Wednesday, I would leave that classroom empty and I would either meet with my students in Zoom on Wednesday or we would have asynchronous activities online on Wednesday for those extra engagement hours. Now, this would save Wake Forest space. You can imagine that there may be a colleague of mine who has a similar schedule and they could decide to meet with their students in person on Wednesday, and then we could share the same classroom space. This turns out does not work for our current problem, which really highlights that the problem with COVID and social distancing is not that we don't have enough classrooms, but rather that we don't have enough classrooms of the right size. Even if I wanted to meet with my students in person 1 day a week or even 1 day a month, there simply would not be enough spaces that would fit all of my students at the same time while social distancing. So this meant we knew pretty quickly that we were going to have to assign classrooms that would fit fewer students than were enrolled in our courses, and that this was going to be pretty much true across the board. This was not unique to Wake Forest, this was true across higher ed, and this is why all of us, whether we're doing simulcasting or not, have innovated this new modality model of rotating cohorts. So we want to make sure you understand what that is so you can think creatively about how you might teach in that modality. So we did our best, fingers crossed, that if you are teaching 2 days a week, we made sure to assign you a room that would at least accommodate half of your students in your course. And if you are teaching 3 days a week, we tried to assign you a room that would fit at least a third of your students. And the reason for this was that it would allow you, if you wanted to meet with every single one of your students at least once a week in person. And the way this would work is that you would divide your class into cohorts. So in a 3-day-a-week class, you would divide them into 3 cohorts. In a 2-day-a-week class, you divide them into 2 cohorts. And they would be blue cohorts, purple cohorts, or green cohorts. And I would keep them the same. You could certainly mix them up, but I think that would get pretty confusing. And so then the cohorts would meet on their designated days. So the blue cohort would meet on Monday, the purple cohort would meet on Wednesdays, and the green cohort would always meet on Fridays. But because these students are only meeting for 1 hour of in-person engagement each week, as you know from our previous discussion of contact hours, we need to design and engage with them, engaging activities online for at least 2 hours each week. Now, importantly, that doesn't have to be unique to each cohort. It doesn't have to happen on the same day as your sessions, your in-person sessions. None of that has to happen. What I would recommend for your workload is that you just design 2 hours of asynchronous work for all 3 cohorts, and it's done on their own time, and it's important work that prepares them for their in-person sessions or that is the core of the course, and the in-person sessions are just supplemental on top of the core of the online work. And we'll say a bit more about that later. So from a student perspective, this looks like a traditional online course. They're meeting, or a traditional blended course. They are meeting in person 1 hour a week for engagement and 2 hours a week for online engagement. So to them, they don't see the rotating cohorts. They just see this as a blended course. For you, it's going to look a bit different though. Like a blended course, you'll do 1 hour, prepare 1 hour of in-person material and 2 hours of online material. But there is something slightly different in that you will be repeating that in-person material 3 times throughout the week and actually meeting during all of your regularly scheduled class periods. So one question you might have is, whether this has to be the model. I know I've gotten that question from many of you. Do you have to meet with your students once a week? Do you have to rotate them Monday, Wednesday, Friday? Do you have to do asynchronous? Can you have synchronous meetings? All sorts of really wonderful questions. And as it turns out, this was just a guide for those of you who wanted some guidance of something you could do. But there are lots of things you can do within constraints, and that's what we're going to talk about in our next video.